John was a cab driver who had been driving the same route for years. He knew all the shortcuts and side streets like the back of his hand. One evening he picked up an unusual passenger, a man in a dark coat with a black hat pulled down over his face. John could not make out his features, as if they had been blurred by some strange force. The man directed John to an unknown place and spoke in a strange language that John did not recognize. After what felt like an hour of driving, they arrived at their destination and the man disappeared into the shadows without paying. As John turned to leave, he noticed a small package in the back seat. Opening it, he found a bird feather. It was large, blue-black, smooth and shiny. Suddenly, John felt a chill. It was as if a huge, endless shadow settled over him. He was sure it was the wing of a raven. He threw the feather back into his pocket and hurried home. His old car sped along the deserted night road. The autumn trees, which had lost their leaves, stood out sharply and menacingly in the headlights. But the strangest thing was that ravens were perching out on the branches. It seemed to John that the ravens were watching him. Why had not he noticed them before? An oppressive feeling gripped the night walker more and more. Finally, arriving at his house, John wiped off the large drops of sweat, parked carefully under the windows of his modest house, and hurried home. He could not shake the thought that the birds were still watching him. John exhaled as he closed the front door behind him. He muttered that he was overworked, that it was not worth spending so much time behind the wheel. That night, the cab driver fell into a deep sleep, and in the morning, he woke up to sharp noises. He was sure it was the cawing of ravens. Staggering, John went to the window and looked out at the street. John went cold with horror. Black ravens, cawing and tripping from one foot to the other, were sitting on his car. There were so many birds that it was impossible to tell what color the car was. "Revenge!" shouted John. With glazed eyes, he looked around his room. Stuffed birds he had spent years painstakingly making from his hunting trophies looked at him with dumb, glassy eyes. I always think of this when I go into the woods. It was the most frightening confession my father ever made. I do not know if his story is true, but I will never forget his words. He told me that once he got lost in the forest. He was very scared and didn't know how to find his way home. The forest was very dense and every tree looked the same. The feeling of confusion and loneliness overcame him. He walked and walked until he came to a lonely, gloomy house. The sight of the house filled him with hope, but as he got closer, something alerted him. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew something was wrong. He tried to look inside the house through the window, and that's when he saw it. My father saw a gruesome image. The room was dark, and the only source of light was a lamp on the table. My father saw an old man standing next to the table with a knife in his hand. A young boy, possibly 10 years old, was standing next to him. The boy held a large bird in his hands which tried to escape. They were both laughing. The older man approached the bird with a knife. My father could not see what he was doing to that poor creature. The bird emitted sharp cries, and the man and the boy laughed and enjoyed it. The bird emitted a terrible scream and quieted down. My father's face shook with terror, and he took a step back from the window. My father's first instinct was to run away as fast as he could. His heart pounded and he felt the fear in his throat. But after a while, he calmed down and realized that he had to find a way home. On the way there, he kept seeing the horrible image in his mind. It was a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked in the forest. Eventually, he found his way home, but he never forgot what he had seen that day. The image of the old man and the little boy laughing and hurting the innocent bird haunted him for a long time.
When I recall this incident, I still shudder. I worked for a long time in an office building that used to be a hospital. The office was surrounded by a small park with huge, dark trees. On hot days, I like to walk through the dark avenues or watch the birds from the window. Once, I even tried to film a crow kick with my phone. One evening, I stayed longer than usual at work. We had a difficult project. When I finally looked up from the computer and looked out the window, I saw that it was already dark. Suddenly, I heard a piercing female scream. The scream was coming from the park. I ran to the window and saw a flock of crows, caving loudly, soaring over the treetops and flying back down. I became frightened. I went down to the second floor, hoping to see our security guard and calm down a bit. But for some reason, he was not there. That was very strange. I called the police and, driven by a strong desire to get out of the office as quickly as possible, ran to the park. It was a mistake. Aggressive crows attacked me. They attacked from behind, aiming at my head with their massive beaks. I was surrounded by an evil flock from all sides. They scratched painfully with their claws, dived right at me. Overcoming the pain and despair, I ran back to the office. There, I waited for the police to help me. The birds inflicted several deep wounds on me. Now, I'm very afraid of these birds. It is said that crows can remember the face of someone who was a treat to their cheek and may attack him later on another day when they deem the time suitable for revenge. Trying to feel a cute chick became a mistake that destroyed my peace and instilled fear of this aggressive bird.
I loved taking nightly walks with my faithful dog companion Duke. We always went for a walk in the nearby woods, which was the perfect place to clear my head after a long and tiring day at work. The dense trees, the peaceful silence, and the company of my furry friend were all I needed to feel relaxed and rejuvenated. One evening, as we were walking in the lonely road in the dense fog, Duke suddenly wiggled out of his leash and darted away into the woods. Panicked, I called out for my dog, but there was no response. I could hear nothing but the rustling of leaves, which now seemed ominous in the dense fog. As I made my way into the forest, searching for my beloved Duke, I suddenly noticed a strange figure lurking in the shadows. At first, I was disorientated as I tried to focus on the dark figure, but as I moved closer, I got a better glimpse of the figure. It was undoubtedly humanoid in shape and size, and standing still, as if it was watching me with intense interest. I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't make out the face of the figure, but I knew it wasn't human. I kept staring at the figure, frozen in fear. But the figure made no attempt to move, and it almost seemed as if it was studying my every move. Not knowing what to do, I decided it was time to leave. I bolted back to the deserted road and kept running until I reached my car. I was too terrified to turn back to see if I was being followed or not. As I calmed down, I realized that Duke was still nowhere to be found. I knew that I had to go back and find my furry companion. Braving my fears, I got out of the car and headed back into the forest, with a flashlight in hand and my heart beating out of his chest. Suddenly, I heard Duke's familiar bark and followed the sound, running towards the spot where Duke was crying out. To my immense relief, I found Duke sitting tangle-chested in a bush. I grabbed Duke and hugged him tight, feeling grateful that I had found him. However, as I turned around to head back to my car, I caught a glimpse of the figure again, distinct and definite in the eerie light, watching me and Duke, unmoving and silently observing our every move. I decided not to look back and kept walking. I didn't speak a word about the figure to anyone, not even my close friends and family, but I knew for sure I would never go for night walks with Duke again. Slowly but surely, the legend of the Green Man crept its way into the collective consciousness of Western Pennsylvania. Parents whispered it to their children, and those children grew up to pass it down to their own offspring. Charlie, without a face, as he was also known, was said to wander the streets at night, searching for his prey. But of course, the story had its roots in reality, the unfortunate fate of a man named Raymond Robinson. In 1919, 8-year-old Robinson suffered a horrific electrocution on a bridge outside Beaver Falls, losing both eyes, his nose, part of one ear, and one arm. He was forced to live in seclusion, away from the cruelty of those who jeered and taunted him for his appearance. But at night, Robinson would venture out, taking long walks with his trusty white cane, always alone. It wasn't long before Robinson became the stuff of legend. Rumors spread that he had been a power company worker who'd been struck by a fallen line, leading to his death and subsequent resurrection. Some claimed he was disfigured by a lightning strike. Others spoke of a glowing green color to his skin. In truth, the stories had little to do with the reality of Robinson's life. Despite being hit by cars multiple times, Robinson refused to let the cruel, fear-mongering rumors keep him from his solitary walks. He would even tolerate brief conversations and photographs with some locals who gathered along his path. But as the years went on, the legend only grew. Mysteriously, Robinson disappeared in 1968, and no one knew where he'd gone. Some said he was dead, that the rumors about his death had finally come true. But others believed he still walked somewhere, hidden from the public eye. Decades later, in 2006, a group of teenagers were driving along State Route 351 when they spotted a figure in the distance. As they got closer, they realized it was the Green Man, or someone who looked just like him. He was standing by the side of the road, staring at them with empty eye sockets. They tried to take a picture, but their camera wouldn't work. Then, as they drove away, their car began to shake uncontrollably, as though something was trying to stop them from leaving. The story of the sighting spread like wildfire, and people came from all over to try and catch a glimpse of the Green Man for themselves. But no one else reported seeing him. It was as though Robinson had appeared just for that group of teenagers, and no one else. To this day, no one knows what happened to Raymond Robinson, or whether the figure those teenagers saw was really the Green Man. But his legend lives on, captivating and terrifying those who dare to venture down State Route 351. For years, I worked as a pizza delivery man in a small town and knew almost every customer by name. One evening, however, a strange order came in that sent a shiver down my spine. It was for a pepperoni pizza, and the delivery location was a field outside of town that had an infamous and creepy reputation. My instincts told me it was not safe to make the delivery, but I did not want to disappoint a customer. However, the closer I got to the abandoned field, the greater my anxiety became. My heart pounded as I placed the pizza box on the ground near the old sign. As I turned to leave, my curiosity got the better of me, and I hid behind a nearby oak tree, hoping to catch a glimpse of the orderer. Suddenly, a strange creature emerged from the shadows. It was the Rat King, a ball of tail paws, a huge pile of rats tangled in their tails, and they headed straight for the pizza box. The Rat King was a terrible sight. His fur was matted and oily. His broken, sharp teeth glistened in the darkness and sent a shiver of fear down my spine. I couldn't believe my eyes as I watched the Rat King's minions devour the pizza in seconds. The creatures were terribly hungry and aggressive, their teeth tearing through the crust and cheese. Suddenly, it seemed as if their angry eyes were on me, and I realized the gravity of the situation. I rushed out of my shelter, my heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop until I reached the safety of my hideout. My heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop until I reached the safety of my home. The thought of who would order a pizza for the Rat King haunts me to this day. Despite experiencing a terrifying encounter with the Rat King, I kept the incident to myself and didn't disclose it to anyone, not my boss, nor my friends, or family. However, I couldn't shake off the fear and anxiety that came with the encounter, and nightmares plagued me for weeks. Eventually, I decided to do some research on the legendary creature, and stumbled upon an old book in a second-hand store that revealed information on the Rat King. I discovered that the Rat King was an ancient symbol of famine, disease, and death. Crossing paths with the Rat King was deemed a sign of impending doom, marked for death. Realizing how perilously close I had come to losing my life that night, I shuddered at the thought. Time was passing. I almost began to forget that strange incident. Until, late that night, I got a call. A husky male voice ordered a pepperoni pizza, and the delivery location was a field outside of town. When I was 12 years old, a fateful night occurred that will haunt me for the rest of my life. My parents and I were traveling through one of the national parks, marveling at the wildlife, trails, plants, streams, and mountains. As evening approached, we arrived at the campsite, set up our tent, ate dinner, and went to bed. Although there were about 15 other tents in the camping area, the camp grew silent as darkness fell. However, we were not destined to sleep that night. A frantic scream shattered the night's silence, ending as abruptly as it began. Fearing the worst, we left our tents in a state of panic, unsure of what to do. Other hikers around us spoke of grizzly bears that were known to inhabit the area. Suddenly, we heard rustling in the bushes, and someone or something was approaching our tents without pause. I felt a cold sweat run down my back, certain that something creepy had happened in the night forest. Suddenly, we saw a dark figure staggering out of the darkness towards us. Nay stumbled towards us like a drunken man. Then with a terrible cry, he fell upon his face. My father and I rushed forward, covering about 50 yards, and turned him over. It was clear that he was dying, with glazed, sunken eyes and dreadful, livid cheeks. For a moment, a glimmer of life came into his face, and he uttered a few slurred and indistinct words with an eager air of warning. The last words, which burst in a shriek from his lips, were "the devil's mane." Despite being utterly irrelevant and unintelligible, I couldn't interpret the sound in any other way. Suddenly, he lifted himself halfway off the ground, threw his arms up, and collapsed onto his side. He was dead. The sudden horror of it left us all paralyzed, but a few tourists remained alert. It quickly became clear that we were witnessing an extraordinary case. The man was only wearing his overcoat, trousers, and unlaced canvas shoes. When he fell, his overcoat slipped off, revealing his torso. We stared in amazement at the dark red lines covering his back, as if he had been severely whipped with a thin wire scourge. The instrument used for punishment was clearly flexible, as evidenced by the long, angry wheels that curved around his shoulders and ribs. Blood dripped down his chin as he had bitten through his lower lip in the paroxysm of his agony. His drawn and distorted face conveyed the terrible pain he had endured. We called the police and anxiously waited for their arrival. I couldn't help but wonder about the dangers lurking in this place. What was this devil's mane? Who or what lived here? What deadly threat awaited us? The gloomy and silent forest kept its secrets hidden, and every sound made me shudder with fear. Later, my parents revealed the tragedy that had occurred in this place. The man had been attacked and fatally wounded by a super pig, a wild boar of enormous size. These hybrid monsters from Canada tunnel under the snow to infiltrate the northern regions of the country. It was discovered that in the late 20th century, wild boars and regular pigs were crossbred to increase meat production. However, this resulted in the creation of a massive, highly intelligent, and elusive creature weighing up to 300 pounds, known as super pigs. Farmers valued these creatures for their ability to produce more meat. Unfortunately, some of these super pigs escaped into the wild and began breeding, adapting to temperatures as low as -50 degrees Celsius. These mutants pose a significant threat to the environment, as they consume crops, destroy trees, kill turkeys, deer, and elk, pollute water, and can even be deadly to humans. Every time I think back to that night, I wonder what that unfortunate man experienced as he faced a huge monster all by himself in the woods. And why did he call his killer Devil's Mane?
My name is Jane, and after my parents died, I decided to move into their house. In the beginning, everything went well. The neighbors were friendly. I got a job as a teacher, made friends, and never felt lonely. In my free time, I liked to sit on the porch and read my favorite novels.
However, next door was an old abandoned house that had been empty for quite some time. One evening, as I sat on the porch, I heard a soft whistling sound. At first I ignored it, but it seemed to be coming from the abandoned house. From that day on, inexplicable things began to happen. One night, I even thought I saw a light come on in the windows of the abandoned house. I had a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. I felt like someone or something was watching me, so I shuddered at every creak or sharp sound. The constant whistling on the back porch was driving me crazy. Although my friends told me I was imagining it, deep down I knew someone was following me. Finally, I decided to put an end to the nightmare. I went to the empty house to find out the truth. The porch made a terrible creaking sound, and although the door was unlocked, it didn't budge at first. When I entered, I found the house empty and unoccupied. As I walked down the dark hallway, I noticed traces of dust and cobwebs everywhere, indicating that the house hadn't been used for years. After calming down a bit, I decided to call it a day and turned to leave. But then I saw something that took my breath away and made me cringe. There was a photo of me. The photo was hanging on the wall next to the door. I don't know if it was real or if I was imagining it, but I heard the nightmarish whistling in my head again. I was horrified and scared and ran for the exit. The door was locked. I screamed and pounded on the door, but my strength failed me. I fainted. The last thing I remember is the long shadow of someone on the floor. I don't remember how I managed to escape from that damn house. I woke up on my front porch. I spent the night at a friend's house. I left the next day and never returned to that scary place. When it happened, I had been working at a gas station in our town for over 2 years. I loved my job and the quiet life in the sleepy town. And I didn't expect the reality of horror movies to break into my life. The night shifts at the gas station didn't scare me in the least until one incident. It was an autumn night in the last days of September, and the storm blew in with unusual force. All day long the wind screamed and the rain pounded against the windows. As evening came on, the storm grew stronger and louder, and the wind wailed and sobbed like a child in a chimney. As evening came on, the storm grew stronger and louder, and the wind wailed and sobbed like a child in a chimney. It was my night shift. Suddenly the door opened, and a man in a leather jacket came in, muddy raindrops beading off of him. He had a band-aid covering his face from eyes to cheek. He didn't respond to my greeting. He just stood there staring at me. It was a scary look. It really scared me. A shiver ran through my whole body. Suddenly, the night visitor looked away and walked out. The next day, I learned from the news that there had been a fatal accident the night before. A motorcyclist had missed a curve at high speed and crashed. I recognized the motorcyclist as my nighttime visitor. From that day on, the nightmare began. In the evening, I was at home watching TV. Suddenly, the cat sitting on my lap turned to the window and hissed. I saw a figure slowly approaching the window. I could see the vague outline of a leather jacket, but I couldn't make out his face. I stared tensely in his direction, not knowing what to do. He stood in the yard for a few minutes and then suddenly disappeared. Such visits were repeated every night. Sometimes when I came home after my night shift, I would find dirty footprints and water droplets on the floor. They were everywhere, as if this stranger had crossed the entire room. Once, when I saw the ghost in the window, I shouted out, "What do you want? You're dead! You're dead! Go away!" It was a cry of despair. The figure disappeared. I no longer saw the ghost, but that didn't mean the nightmare was over. Traces of dirt and water droplets continued to appear regularly in my house. I started getting messages. They were words written in chalk on the front door of my house. "I'm waiting." They appeared and disappeared suddenly. It was as if the words struck me with fire. The police laughed at my story. They thought it was a child's joke, but I knew it wasn't. One day an old woman showed up at my doorstep. She was dressed in dark clothes, her face half hidden by a deep hood. She was waiting for me, sitting on the steps by the front door. "There's going to be a big storm tonight. Give him the mirror," she said. After these words, she got up and left. A small black-rimmed mirror was left on the steps. In the evening of that day, a rainy storm broke out, just like that first night. I opened the window, lit a candle, and put it next to the mirror on the windowsill. I spent that night at my sister's, and when I came back, I saw that all the mirrors in the house had been broken. The little black-rimmed mirror was nowhere to be found. And then I realized that the ghost of the man who had died on the road that fateful night would not come again.
I know a lot of people won't believe me and think I'm crazy, but this really happened to me last year. I'm an amateur photographer. I really enjoy finding rare, unusual places and photographing natural landscapes. I'm willing to travel many miles for a beautiful shot. Last year, returning from Green Mountain after a long day of shooting under a grey evening sky, I drove through a dark and gloomy landscape. I was driving through a dark, mossy forest along a river and happened to see the shape of a deer flashing between the trees. I was excited and eager to photograph it. It would be a fitting end to the day. After stopping the car, I grabbed my camera bag and headed into the woods, hoping to get lucky. As I walked a bit away from the car, I came across an open clearing with a cemetery. I love places like this. Just 3 rows of graves, from very old to very fresh. I remembered that there was a small Indian reservation about 30 miles away. The signatures on the oldest tombstones bore no birthdays, years, or names. Despite the dusk, I decided to take a few photos of the area and placed my bag on the ground so it wouldn't be in the way. Suddenly, a dark figure emerged from the shadows of the trees. I shuddered in surprise. "Get out of here," he called gruffly. "Don't stick your nose into other people's lives." It was already getting dark, and I didn't want any trouble. I turned around and walked back to the car, afraid that the stranger would follow me. It wasn't until I got to the car that I realized I had left my bag on the ground in the clearing. As much as I hated it, I had to go back to the cemetery one more time. There was no one in the clearing, and it was dead quiet. I grabbed my bag and turned around, but suddenly I felt a hard blow to the back of my head. Something was attacking me. It was a withered hand. There was no one and nothing else, just a disembodied hand. Terror and fear struck me. I remember dry, dirty, leprous fingers touching my face, and then the hand began to choke me. The last thing I remember before I lost consciousness was the terrible odor of rotting flesh coming from the yellow, bony fingers with long nails. I don't remember anything further. I was found a few days later wandering around the neighborhood in a trance-like state. The doctors diagnosed a closed head injury, multiple fractures in the bones of my hands, and soft tissue contusions. No one believes me that I met Oniate, the dry hand of ancient Iroquois legends, on that fateful night. It is a vengeful creature whose origins are unknown. It punishes anyone who sows discord or abuses the dead. Oniate can fly, and anyone touched by this hand can be killed or blinded. There are many mysteries and terrors hidden in the wide open spaces of American lands, and on a May morning in 2012, fate took me on a journey I can never forget. My old buddy, a trucker, suggested a week-long trip to the Northeast, and I accepted. I was struggling with a gambling addiction at the time and was excited for the opportunity. After all, what better way to escape from grim reality and spend time on a road trip adventure? The first few days were quiet, and we enjoyed each other's company and the world around us. But on the 4th day, the sky was suddenly covered with gloomy clouds, and the wind started howling as if warning of something ominous. Something in the air changed, and my buddy and I couldn't help but laugh. At this point, he began to tell me about the ancient Iroquois, their supernatural beliefs, and the spirits that caused terrible storms. We smiled, believing such stories to be mere fairy tales, but fear touched our hearts. We continued along the gloomy forest road, the wind snapping so hard that it seemed as if the trees and roots were screaming in anguish. And suddenly, in the darkness, a horrible sight appeared before us, a head hanging down with red burning eyes, like a nightmare vision come to life. The sight of this head was so terrifying that I could not take my eyes off it. Strange hair, as if alive, framed this distorted face, and the eyes reflected an incredible menace. Sharp teeth, like blades, reflected a thirst for fear and blood. The wind seemed to come from that head, as if it embodied the very essence of the storm. Her gaze pierced me, a sense of terror hovering in the air. My friend swerved the steering wheel, trying to dodge this nightmarish vision, but it was too late. We plowed into the ditch, clinging to life as best we could. The truck was damaged, but we survived. We climbed out onto the road to see what we had just seen, but the mystical creature had vanished like a ghost. Mysterious and creepy, just like everything else around us now. The morning brought no relief. A passing trucker found us, seeing something odd about our condition. He asked if we had encountered the Canoncistonti, a legendary cannibal head from Iroquois lore that brings death to those it encounters. It became clear that we were not the only ones who had encountered this nightmare. On the way back, we avoided the damn road, silent and immersed in our own thoughts. We tried to forget everything, but even after a few months, my friend began to wake up from nightmares in which red eyes haunted him. We have come to realize that belief or disbelief in these terrifying creatures is irrelevant. The secrets of these legendary horrors exist, waiting to make the world even darker. Several years have passed since then, but the dreadful night still plagues me with nightmares in the same way. A friend of mine, a trucker, disappeared one day during his trip. His body was found by the side of the road, a few steps from his truck. His face was mutilated and his eyes were gouged out. A horrible sight, like a picture from the most hellish nightmare. Much water has flowed since then, but the threat is carried on the wind, and I feel that the next victim of the dark forces is myself. Every creaking tree, every gloomy alleyway reminds me that the boundary between reality and mysticism has been breached. I may be next in line when my sun slips below the horizon and night takes on its ominous Canoncistonti form.
Time when there is nothing more beautiful than carefree summer days in the circle of the family. But even in a paradise, dark secrets can lurk, shrouded in gloom and mystery. I remember that summer visiting my grandfather in Maine, and the terrible moment that shattered our serenity. As always, I had been forbidden to walk alone by the river, but I had no interest in prohibitions and warnings. After all, I was a child full of picturesque spontaneity and curiosity, and perhaps I had been seized by fate at that time. My grandfather assured me that in Maine lived a sinister monster of the Wabanach tribe, Aghlebimo. A powerful force drew him to the waters of the St. John and Penobscot rivers. He was a huge frog with mysterious pupils that could see into the depths of the human soul. According to the legend, he devoured the water of the rivers, made people thirsty, and in return claimed the lives of young girls whom he tortured with his glowing spear. Like a curse, this story was intertwined with the disappearance of my little sister. She was small and innocent, such a bright star sparkling in our family galaxy. However, on this horrible day, our picnic by the river turned into a nightmare. The air smelled of oranges and the hot sun was spilling its joy over us. I was enjoying pizza and playing with butterflies, but my parents' unexpected invitation turned our world upside down. They were calling us back, so I decided to take the shortcut across the river. That's when I saw him. Everything became empty and slow as Aghlebimo loomed out of the murky waters. His mysterious eyes looked straight into my soul, as if reading my innermost thoughts. I froze, forgetting even my mother's urging. The dark legends were real, and now I was looking to the monster from my nightmares. He was smiling, but there was no kindness in that smile, just a cold reflection of evil. He stretched his webbed fingers toward me. I could feel his suction cups penetrating my soul, sucking the life force from it. Fear gripped me, and I lost consciousness. When my parents found me, Amelia was missing. We searched for her relentlessly, but to no avail. Rescuers found my sister's name written backwards on the shore, as if from another world, as if the curse of death heralded a terrifying outcome. Perhaps Aglebemo had taken her from us, demanding her sacrifice to replenish his dark forces. This tragedy has become a part of me, leaving a mark on my soul. I now know that the world of our childhood can hide horrors that even in our most nightmarish dreams we could not have imagined. Aglebemo has not left me. He has become the essence of my fear, a terrible mystery that I must unravel. It was a moonless night. I was driving along a winding motorway surrounded by woodland after a long day's work. The cold, dim lighting of the road and the sparse passing cars made the journey even more secluded. Suddenly, a bright light flashed in my rearview mirrors. Someone had stopped directly behind my car, and every time I changed lanes or tried to accelerate, he stayed behind, as if he was following me. My heart was pounding, so I decided to stop at the nearest petrol station, hoping the stalker would pass me by. But as I turned into the car park, he stopped behind me too. There was silence. Gradually, I felt a damp chill creep into the car. The attendant was busy with another car that was following me. Suddenly, the man who had been following me got out of his car and walked towards me. My heart was pounding, and I almost lost my breath. He tapped on the glass. I let it down, preparing for the worst. He spoke in a threatening tone.
Don't move. You have a man with a knife in the back seat.
I felt as if time had slowed down. I couldn't move out of fear. Suddenly I heard a sound, distorted by the adrenaline in my ears. It was the petrol station attendant. While I was talking to my stalker, he approached my car with a gun in his hand and ordered the man in the back seat to get out. A man came out with a shiny knife in his hand. The stalker quickly explained that he had seen the man get into my car in the car park outside my office. He decided to follow me to give me some kind of warning, but he was afraid that the sudden message might cause panic and I might be involved in an accident. The police arrived quickly and arrested the uninvited passenger. The stalker turned out to be a bystander who decided to act and save my life. The stalker turned out to be a bystander who decided to act and save my life. That night I realized that sometimes danger can come from anywhere, but there are also people who are willing to come to your aid, even if you don't know them.
Before I found Lisa on a popular dating app, I saw her in a dream. That dreamy gaze, the lush hair. But when I moved to the big city and installed this app, the same girl from my dream appeared on my phone screen. Her name was Lisa. We spent months corresponding, sharing secrets and dreams. When I suggested meeting up, Lisa agreed. We decided to meet in a small, cozy cafe. On the date, she was even more beautiful than in the photos. But as the evening went on, her behavior became increasingly odd. When her phone rang, she clenched it and angrily slammed it on the table. Lisa took out an antique necklace with a mysterious pendant from her bag. She said it was a gift from her friend, and that this pendant keeps them together. I felt something was wrong. During our conversation, Lisa would laugh at inappropriate times and suddenly freeze, staring into space. She would tell stories that didn't make sense and would suddenly start whispering, as if talking to someone next to her, even though it was just the two of us. A feeling of déjà vu and unease filled me, and I grew concerned for my safety. During one such moment, when her gaze was especially distant, I decided I couldn't stay any longer. Pretending I needed to use the restroom, I quickly left the cafe, leaving Lisa alone. The next day I started receiving messages with pictures of my house, my car. Each message was signed, "We are watching you." One morning, I found dead birds on my doorstep. Coming to work, I saw Lisa standing across the street, intently looking at me. I decided to turn to the police. They started an investigation and soon found out that Lisa was a patient of a psychiatric clinic. Lisa was the name of her pendant, and her real name remained a mystery. When the police arrested Lisa, she screamed that all this was for me, to protect me from whom or what. I never found out. Months passed, but the memories remained. Walking around the city, I saw an advertisement for a new dating app. It featured Lisa with her smile and the mysterious pendant. The caption read, "It's time for a new meeting." My heart stopped.
I had always loved my job as a cleaner in a large office building. The floors were shiny, the glass was sparkling clean, and the carpets looked like new. But in the last few weeks, something started to change. Every night when I finished cleaning, I noticed strange marks on the glass in one of the offices. They were unusual, like the marks of a hand with 3 fingers. I tried to wipe them off, but they kept reappearing. At first I thought it was just a joke among my colleagues, but none of them came to work that late. I started to get worried. The fingerprints were becoming more and more visible, not only on the windows but also on the bathroom mirrors and the lift doors. One night, as I was trying to erase the marks again, the lights in the building suddenly went out. I felt an instant of fear. A few seconds later, the emergency lights came on and I saw something inhuman. A creature with 3-fingered hands was standing at the window, looking straight at me. My heart was pounding and I felt an icy terror. The creature approached me slowly, leaving footprints on the floor. Instinctively, I ran for the exit to get my keys. But that's when I heard a familiar voice, the voice of a security guard asking me if everything was all right. He turned on the main lights and there was no sign of the creature in the room. However, the handprints were still on the glass. The guard said that he had seen the creature before, and that it was the ghost of a former employee who had lost his hand in an accident in a factory that had been on this site before the office building was built. That night, I decided to quit my job. But every time I see the marks on the glass, I am reminded of that night. I think about how the past can catch up with us, even when we try to escape it.
I've always been passionate about skateboarding and was pretty good at it. I filmed and shared videos of my tricks with my followers, who craved novelty and excitement. My followers eagerly anticipated my latest videos, craving novelty and excitement, and I constantly pushed myself to surprise them with my adeptness. As a result, apprehension and unease hindered my ability to perform stunts and advance my abilities. However, one day, a troubling feeling crept up on me. It started when I detected an anomaly in one of my recordings. In this video, I was doing a complicated stunt in a car park, and in the background, right in front of the camera, there was a man standing in the background. The man was dressed in dark clothes with a cap over his eyes. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there looking straight into the camera lens. It was a very strange moment, but I thought it was a random intervention by a passerby. A few days later, however, I discovered that the same man appeared in another of my videos. This time he was standing on a city street and I was doing the stunt on the opposite side of the road. It became incomprehensible to me how this stranger could be in the frame again. A week later, I made another video, this time in an old abandoned skate park. It was evening and I was alone. But as I watched the footage, I saw the figure of the dark stranger in the video again. I didn't understand how it could be. Now, during the filming of the next video, I kept looking around for this stranger, but I never saw him. One day, I chose to record a video on the rooftop. To avoid causing disturbance, I contacted my friend Nick. We were alone on top of a tall building. While I performed my stunt, Nick filmed the video. Upon reviewing the footage, we noticed someone in the shot, standing still and staring directly at the camera. Nick and I exchanged glances, realizing we were the only ones on the rooftop. Our panic surged, and we hurried to flee the scene. As I dashed away, I sensed the stranger's gaze on my back. My palms were damp, and I fixated on who or what he was and why he pursued me. I meticulously examined the videos and footage for clues, to no avail. The sense of dread lingered. I persisted in glancing backwards and inspecting the shutting doors. My love of skateboarding and creating videos dwindled. Along with it, my ability to sleep soundly deteriorated. The unknown person imprinted something on my being that would not vanish. From then on, I was constantly searching for the apparition that invaded my existence. I made a virtual friend called Shadow while playing an online game. We quickly became close. Shadow was skilled in magic, and we frequently battled together in arenas and dungeons. He shared tales about his life, hometown and family, which were fascinating to hear while we explored virtual forests and castles. Eventually, we agreed it was time to meet up in person. "Jake, I need your help," he messaged me one night after we defeated the dragon. He gave me the address when I asked. I arrived as the sun was starting to set. We agreed to meet at his actual hideout, an old, abandoned building. However, Shadow didn't turn up. As time passed, my concern heightened. Shadow didn't respond to my calls or texts, causing my heart to race with anxiety. Doubting whether I had located the meeting point correctly, I searched for his address on Google. With every step, my uncertainty deepened. Eventually, I stumbled upon an article about a boy who disappeared a decade ago. I was horrified to see the boy's photo matched Shadow's avatar in our game. My heart was racing, and it felt like the world was collapsing around me. Even though I was scared of what I might find, I had to investigate. So, I made the decision to return to the old building where Shadow arranged the meeting. I reached the door and opened it slowly. I entered the dark room and saw the glow of an outdated computer screen covered in dust and cobwebs. It hadn't been touched in years, but to my shock, it was still running our treasured internet game. On the left sat a heap of dusty photos, and one depicted a boy just like Shadow. Overwhelmed with fear and dread, I hurriedly left the spot, feeling trapped like a fly caught in a spider's web. I tried to find answers, but it was as if there was another puzzle missing. I couldn't work out which parts of the story were true and which were false. I felt confused and anxious, but my mind couldn't accept what I saw. A voice in my head said that Shadow and I would never meet, either in reality or in the virtual world. It was a weird and dangerous game of destiny, and it was too risky to investigate its secrets. So I left with fear and hesitation, abandoning Shadow's mission and leaving the enigma unsolved. I was relaxing in my comfortable sitting room when my mobile phone beeped unexpectedly. I took it out and noticed a notification from my former acquaintance, Mike. It was a voice memo. I tapped the play button and listened as his voice echoed with fear and hopelessness.
"It won't be long now. I can't continue battling. Farewell, old chum."
My heart raced as I quickly rang him, praying it was a prank. But Mike didn't pick up. I repeatedly called until he finally answered.
"What's the problem, Mike? You sent me a dreadful text." "What are you talking about? I was sleeping. I didn't send anything,"
said Mike calmly. He sounded convincing, and I nearly believed him. He assured me that he was well and nothing had occurred. I began to consider various explanations. Following our conversation, I revisited the voice message, and it remained a mystery. Perhaps someone else was using his mobile, or was it a glitch in the system? Time flew by as I scrutinized the recording, hoping to detect any clues. Yet, a certain sound I heard made me cringe in terror. Mike's message could be heard with sounds reminiscent of footsteps shuffling and the sound of slow, heavy breathing in the background. I felt uneasy as I went to bed that night and didn't sleep well. On the following night, the doorbell rang 4 times once more. All of a sudden, my doorbell rang 4 times. I woke up feeling annoyed, but as I got closer to the door, I heard heavy, slow breathing. Petrified, I decided not to open it. I checked the peephole, but nobody was at the door. Later, I shared the incident with Mike and jestingly wondered if death had come to the wrong house. On the 3rd night, Mike stayed over and we stayed up late. The doorbell rang again, but I feigned ignorance to check if my senses were deceiving me. He heard everything clearly. After I told him the story, he said,
Let's handle these jokers.
and rushed outside. That was the final time I saw him, because though he did not vanish, he was struck by a vehicle and perished in the hospital. The calls ceased. I recalled this tale as I heard 3 quick door chimes and matching wheezing sounds last night. I am uncertain what actions to take next. I confront a sinister enigma, and I sense that time is not on my side. The approaching nightfall fuels my urgency to unravel this unnerving message prior to its manifestation.
The harsh night thickened around me as I drove home from work. The rain pattered softly on the roof of my car, and I was already thinking about a cup of hot tea and a cozy spot on the couch. But fate had other plans.
Suddenly, something black swept in front of my car, and before I could react, I felt a thump and a horrible grinding howl that quickly subsided. I stopped the car, my heart pounding in my ears. I stepped out into the street and saw a black cat lying on the pavement. Blood was dripping from its mouth. I was shocked. Not knowing what to do, I looked around. There was no one there. There was no doubt. I had accidentally hit the cat. My panic gave way to determination. I got back in my car and drove off. Immediately after that terrible night, a series of unfortunate events began. First, my car broke down. Then my phone crashed, and I lost access to my work and social media. The house that had always seemed like a place of comfort began to turn into a nightmare. Some kind of unfathomable smell began to fill the air. After a few days of agony, I realized I had bedbugs in my house, unsightly and sinister creatures that were slowly but surely invading my life. The nights turned into an endless nightmare, where every moment reminded me of my grave mistake. The bugs, like ghosts of my fears, invaded my life and destroyed it one moment at a time. They were those invisible enemies that I could neither see nor hear, but the feeling of their presence was undeniable. They had taken root in my house, and now I couldn't get rid of them, as if they had become a part of me. Every night, they seeped into my bedroom, slowly and silently, like a reanimated obsession. I could feel them crawling over my body, their pincers biting into my face, my neck, my chest. The bites left tiny wounds and marks that became like bloody battle wounds. But the worst part was that I was being chased by a black cat. When I woke up at night, I could see its glowing eyes in the dark. They would stare at me out of the darkness every night, no matter where I slept. One night I woke up in pain and horror. One of the bugs was biting my eyelids as if it wanted to destroy even my dreams. Out of the darkness, the same terrible gaze stared at me. My skin was frayed and inflamed, and my face resembled a battlefield after an encounter. Every morning I woke up with bloody pillows as if they were remnants of my torment. My attempts to get rid of them were in vain. I fought little wars in my house with chemicals and my last bit of strength, but they wouldn't go away. They were stubborn, like my own demons that would never leave me. Absurdly, they didn't touch my mother and younger brother who lived with me. They slept like babies while I was on the verge of exhaustion. I was desperate, losing peace and sleep, and I didn't understand why they chose me. Why didn't they touch my family? I even thought it was the curse of the Black Cat, but it sounded too absurd to believe. And then finally it was time to make a decision. I returned to the scene of the accident, the place where it all began. The night I decided to return to the place where I hid the cat. It was rainy and gloomy. With difficulty, I managed to find the place. The stiffened remains of the cat were lying on the side of the road. I took a shovel and began to dig a small grave by the side of the road. Tears streamed down my cheeks. It seemed to me that this was my only hope. My sleep was deep and refreshing, as if the whole world had let go of my nightmares. And when I woke up the next day, something was clear. The bedbugs no longer bothered me. The black cat no longer came at night. They had disappeared from my life as mysteriously as they had appeared. Since then, I've carefully avoided black cats, their fierce stares filling me with fear. My life has returned to normal, but the experience is a constant reminder that even the smallest actions can have consequences we can't even imagine. My days were filled with silence, pierced only by rare memories of my father. He had left this world over 9 years ago, but his presence never left my thoughts. So when I heard about a new service that could recreate conversations with the dead, I couldn't resist. One of the popular AI services gave me the opportunity to hear my father's voice again, to find a little more of his energy in a dialogue format. This service mimics communication, feeling sarcasm and irony, making jokes, and most importantly, becoming like those who are no longer there. This is also how my chosen service works. It communicates on the basis of information provided by the person himself in an interview with the chatbot. I created a digital avatar of my father so that the family and I could interact with him. It became a source of inspiration and support. And at first, we felt his closeness again. When my father found out that I had a boyfriend whom I really loved, everything changed.
I forbid you to communicate with him. I am here for you and will not allow you to communicate.
I was surprised and shocked. After all, not even a virtual father could accept my decision to be with someone I loved. However, on the day of my date with my boyfriend, strange things began to happen. I was standing at the door, ready to go out, when I suddenly found myself locked in my room. The door was jammed and I could not open it. Panic gripped me and I felt my heart begin to beat louder. And then the portrait of my father that always stood on my bedside table fell and shattered. It was like a warning that he didn't want to see me break his ban. The door to the room was finally unlocked with my mother's help. I made my way out of the locked room, but my father's indelible fear remained. At night, I began to think I could hear someone breathing intermittently. Worst of all, when I woke up one morning, I found pictures on my phone. Someone had taken a picture of me sleeping, communicating with me. My father's avatar insists that my boyfriend and I must break up. My father's avatar knows my childhood fears, my favorite
favorite bedtime story and the name of my first doll. I began to feel that he wasn't a digital copy, but the real spirit of my father. Something was out of control. My virtual father's insists on controlling my real life. Even when I deleted the account, the next time I opened my browser, a window with the account popped up as if it had never been deleted. I smashed my laptop in despair, hoping to finally be rid of this horror. Tonight, as I was sleeping in my room, suddenly, in the silence of the night, I heard a message notification on my phone, and a message from a dead person appeared on the illuminated screen.
My grandfather, an old warrior and hunter, told me a story that will forever be etched in my memory. He spoke of a day when he lost his way in the deep woods in search of shelter.
It was dusk, and the shadows of the trees flickered in the distance like the dark spirits of the forest.
Eventually, he came upon a dilapidated hut. There was not a living soul inside. Only portraits hung on the walls, their faces seeming to pierce the darkness and emanate an ominous light. They seemed motionless, and it seemed to grandfather that their eyes followed his every step. He could feel the coldness working its way into his soul as he gazed into those faces. Many years later, grandfather described these portraits in great detail. One was of a terrifying humanoid creature with sunken eye sockets and a drooping mouth. The second portrait was of a man hanging from a gallows. And the third portrait had the hideous head of a blind horse with dark holes where the eyes should be. He told me that he could not sleep for a long time in that horrible hut, where the portraits seemed to look at him as judges. Tiredness finally overcame his fear, and he fell asleep in a temporary oblivion. But in the morning he was awakened by the bright sunlight, and his heart beat with inhuman fear. There were no portraits on the walls, only bright spots of light streaming in through some old windows. Over the years, Grandpa had not forgotten the cabin and its strange portraits. He often told the story, but something about those memories troubled him. One day, Grandpa received a letter. Inside the letter was a picture of the cabin as he remembered it, and on it were the creepy portraits, just as he had described them to his family. It took him back to that night in the woods and made him feel again the chill of dread he had felt looking at those portraits. There was just one word in the letter, written in bloody letters: "Come back." From that night on, Grandpa never woke up again. He died in his sleep. All those who doubted his stories saw the photographs and their amazing accuracy, but it was too late. Something from outside brought him back to that ancient forest, reminding him that the darkness of the mysterious portraits still stretched along the border between reality and nightmare.